Welcome to Matlab. This is the program that has all the power to help you find the exciting answers to your research questions. Let's start by getting oriented with the different areas that you'll be using. On the left, you'll see the current folder. That's where Matlab is going to read your data from, so you'll need to make sure that your MIDI files are showing in this box. I'll show you how to do that in a second. To the right of that, in the middle, the biggest part of the screen is the command window. This is where you're going to be typing your commands and doing the majority of your work. This is where you'll tell Matlab what and how to analyze for you. On the far right side is the workspace. This is where the results of your commands are going to appear. Anything that you ask Matlab to do for you will give you a result in the workspace. The data in the workspace is both the results of your analyses and also the data to be analyzed. I'll get into that more as we work through the types of things that can appear in your workspace. The first thing we're going to explore in Matlab, because it requires the least setup and knowledge of Matlab, is the Music Therapy Toolbox. The Music Therapy Toolbox, or mttb for short, is a function within Matlab that can analyze MIDI data. So in the command window, you're going to type mttb and hit enter. You'll notice that a new window is going to pop up. This is the Music Therapy Toolbox, ready to be used to analyze your data. Once the Music Therapy Toolbox is open, you'll want to load in the improvisation that you're going to analyze. So click here on Improvisations, load Impro, and then click through to find the MIDI file that you want to analyze. And click Open. You'll notice that the piano roll score will show up at the top and it'll say the name right here of your MIDI file. That's how you know that it's been opened. Now that you've got your MIDI file loaded into the Music Therapy Toolbox, you'll want to start analyzing it. So click the Analysis button at the top here and click Analyze. You'll see a pop-up with a list of things that you can choose for it to analyze, and you can select as many or as few of these at a time. At the bottom, you'll see the window length, which has a default of 6. And what this means is that it's giving an average of the data over 6 seconds and then stepping forward and analyzing the next 6 seconds to give you the average over time. So once you've selected the data that you want to analyze, click on Start. And it will show you a graph for each of the selections that you made. You'll see the seconds at the bottom of the screen, and you'll see 2 lines on each graph because this MIDI file included both the therapist and the client's music. This is how you can compare them and maybe look at the relationship between client and therapist based on any similarities and differences between the 2 lines. One thing to note about the Music Therapy Toolbox is that it's not always consistent about who is the red line and who is the blue line. So one time you analyze the client's line may be blue, the next time the client's line may be red. So the way to be sure is by which one starts first. You'll notice here that the red line begins first, and personally I made it a habit of ensuring that the client always starts first with the improvisation, so I know always that whichever line comes in first is the client's line. In this case, it's red. And another neat thing you can do within the Music Therapy Toolbox is to zoom in, so to speak, on a particular portion of the improvisation that you want to analyze. So if you're only interested in analyzing, say, from 11 seconds to 46 seconds, you can use these scroll bars at the top to adjust the zoom and the timing where it starts and where it ends. So I'll just give an example and you can play around and make sure it fits. So now we've only got from 7 seconds to 87 seconds instead of the very beginning to the very end. If you want to save your mttb analysis to look back at it later, you can do that by clicking Analysis and then Save Analysis. This will save it as a TIFF file, which is an image, so you can look back at it later, but you won't be able to edit or reanalyze it. You can click through to save it within your project folder, and we highly recommend taking a look at the file naming conventions document that we created to help with having consistent, clear, and organized files. Now that we've experimented a little bit with mttb, go ahead and close this window, and we're going to start using the MIDI toolbox, which is another set of functions within Matlab. The first thing we need to do is get your data ready to be analyzed. So back in this current folder box, you need to make sure that all of your MIDI files that you want to analyze are ready to be accessed by Matlab. To do this, click here on the icon with the folder and the green arrow, and click through the folders to the one that has the MIDI files that you want to be analyzed. You can click Open or just double click on the folder. And now you should see everything in that folder on the left, including all of your MIDI files. And now that they're accessible, we can start analyzing. I'm not going to go through every single command that you can do in Matlab because there's just too many, and that's what the MIDI toolbox manual is for. You can find the manual saved on the desktop of the lab computer, right here, as well as in Finder, and then Documents, Matlab Resources, and it's right here, the MIDI toolbox manual. When you open this up, it will give you all of the commands that come with this toolbox that has been installed into Matlab to analyze MIDI data. This manual is something you'll probably want to have open at all times while you're using Matlab. It guides you through every single one of the commands. It's got them categorized by types of commands, it's got information about how it's doing the analysis, and it gives examples of how to use each of the commands. So here's a basic introduction to how to use Matlab. You're going to be able to find all of this information in the MIDI toolbox manual over here. But for those of you who learn better by watching somebody walk through it or by hearing somebody talk through it, this is for you. So the first thing that you're going to do is to read your MIDI file. This means that you're going to get Matlab to interpret all of the numerical data that is embedded in that MIDI file. And the command for that is read MIDI. And the first thing to know about typing commands is that anytime you want to start a new command, you need to make sure that there are the two chevrons or double arrows at the start of the line. These will pop up automatically when Matlab is ready to take a new command. If you notice that they're not there, that means Matlab is still trying to complete another task, so give it a minute until it's ready. Let's type our read MIDI command. Start with read MIDI, and then in brackets and single quotation marks, you're going to type the name of the file that you want to read. A very important consideration as you type your commands is that any small error in the formula will give you an error message. So in our read MIDI command, we need to make sure that we have open and closed brackets, as well as the single quotation marks around the file name, and, most importantly, the file name has to be exact, case sensitive, and including the .mid at the end, or it will not recognize what it is supposed to read. Once you've entered your command, hit enter and make it happen. It's going to come up with a whole stack of numbers, and you'll notice over here in the workspace that we now have an answer, or ANS, which is short for answer. So as we mentioned earlier, anytime you give a command, you'll see the result in the workspace. And the result of the read MIDI command is always a matrix of numbers, or a note matrix, which is how we will refer to it going forward and how it is referred to in the manual. And I'll explain the note matrix in a bit more detail in a minute. But for now, what you need to know is that this is the numerical data of the MIDI file, which is what you will actually be analyzing. Now that we've got our note matrix in the workspace as an ANS, we can rename it so that we know what this answer actually is. So let's right-click on ANS and click Rename. And for now, let's call it NMAT, or short for Notematrix. Now, there is a way that we can combine the two steps of reading our MIDI file and naming our Notematrix. So when we were typing the read MIDI command, instead of just typing read MIDI, we can tell it what to call the result in advance, instead of calling it ANS in the workspace. To do this, type out what you will want your Notematrix to be named, for example, NMAT, and then equals, and then the same read MIDI command. And your result will show up now as NMAT instead of ANS. So what we've just created is called a note matrix. Let's get an idea of what this matrix of numbers actually represents. There is a row of numbers for every single note that was played in your improvisation. So every time a key was struck, it created a new row in this note matrix. You'll notice over here in the workspace that the NMAT has a value of 388 by 7, which means that 388 rows and 7 columns. Therefore, 388 notes were played. And each of the 7 columns holds a different piece of information about the note, such as pitch, onset time, duration, volume, etc. If you want to know more detail about each column, it's all right here in the manual. The next thing that may be of interest to you is if you're only wanting to analyze a section of your improvisation. Let's say you've got a 5-minute improvisation and you know that there's an interesting section right in the middle, and you only want to analyze, say, from 45 seconds to 57 seconds. That's 12 seconds in the middle that you want to analyze, and you don't need the whole note matrix of your entire improvisation. So the way that you can isolate just those 12 seconds that you actually want to spend your time focusing on is by using the Onset Window command. When we're using Onset Window, again, we're going to name the note matrix the same way you did when we started the read MIDI command, because Onset Window is going to create a new note matrix. So maybe you want to call it M moment because you're analyzing the meaningful moment of the improvisation. And then you're going to type Onset Window, and again, we need the bracket. Onset Window is the command, and then inside the bracket is telling it what to do with the Onset Window command. So first we type the name of the note matrix that you're wanting to manipulate or shorten. So we type NMAT and then a comma, and we're going to type the second that you want to start at. So we're starting at 45 seconds into the improvisation, another comma, and then the second that you want to end at. So let's say 57 seconds. And finally, we need to specify whether the units we're using are beats or seconds, which again needs to be in quotation marks. And lastly, make sure to close the bracket and hit enter. And now we have a new note matrix that only has data from 45 seconds to 57 seconds, so that you can analyze only that brief moment that is actually significant. So that's it for our Matlab tutorial for today. Don't forget to have a read through the MIDI toolbox manual, as that's where you're going to find so much more information. And also feel free to do more research on your own, as there is way more that can be done with both MIDI files and audio files in Matlab. And you'll be able to find so much information, and you'll be able to learn so much by doing a little bit more of your own research online. Good luck and have fun!